So what we're going to do now is talk about phase one implementation. We're going to give a demo of a new dashboard that we're going to roll out in EchoGov first before it goes to the public in Echo. Jesse will talk about the schedule. And we're first focusing on phase one, so we're specifically talking about DMR filers, and we're trying to make sure that there's a good tool for EPA and the states to use to accurately characterize the data that's in ISIS, because we want to make sure we understand what's in ISIS and that you understand what's in ISIS in terms of how well states are sharing data with us. And with that, I will turn it over to Jesse.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. So before I go into the demo of the dashboard itself, we'll give a little background information. We have a few slides for you. So as Carrie alluded to, the point here is to provide easy access for all the states that are implementing electronic reporting, so you can see how your progress looks and what needs work done. So one important thing to note is that the information is all coming from ISIS NPDES. So there are errors in the data, and we'll get to that, and those are hopefully things that we can fix through ISIS, and then will be refreshed into the dashboard. And that refresh will happen weekly. So the idea is that it shows how well states are doing at sharing necessary facility and permit data to facilitate the electronic reporting of DMRs, as it says in the slide. And the plan is we will roll this out in EchoGov in the next week or two. We don't have a specific date for that, but that will give time for the EPA and states to review all the data over the next few months, and then we'll make the dashboard available to the public in July of 2017. So everyone in EchoGov will have time to fix any issues that they see, and we can have a better product available come July. So just want to talk briefly about the data that will be included in the dashboard that you're going to see in a few minutes. So it only includes individual permits. We will hope to add general permits around April of next year, but currently I'll delve more into this in another slide, but for now it'll just include individual permits. That'll also be permits with stats that are effective, administratively continued or expired, and will include majors and minors, but only the current version of the permit. So, okay, so to make the data a little bit more useful, we've grouped all of the permits into 4 categories. Hopefully this slide makes clear how that distinction is made. And we can see in the topmost category, permit limits present equals no, which means, somewhat self-explanatory, that there are no permit limits present in ISIS NPDES. The next category is for those that have permit limits present, but permit limits are present, but compliance and/or limit set tracking status. Tracking status is set to off. And then we have the next category, unresolved DMRs, which means that permit limits are present and compliance and/or limit set tracking status is on, but there are unresolved DMRs. And to help clarify what that means, we have these 2 tables in the bottom. So having unresolved DMRs means that some DMRs for that permit have a violation code of D80 or D90, which means that they're overdue or incomplete, and an unresolved or resolution code of 1 or A, which means they have not yet been resolved. And then the final category, which is what we're hoping to move all permits into, is DMR ready. And what that category means is that everything is set to on, where you can track the limits. Sorry, the limit is on and the tracking is on, and there are no unresolved DMRs. So when I get to the demo, what we want to see is mostly blue. And just one final slide of background, so we can talk about some limitations and how we hope to improve the dashboard going forward. As I mentioned before, the dashboard can only show data as it currently is in ISIS. So one example of an issue here is that you'll see you can filter by region within the dashboard, but currently, if you do that, some state or some permits that are in, for example, Idaho will show up in region 3. And that is because when the data was entered into ISIS, there was an error in the data. So we're hoping that this dashboard will allow people to see those errors. You can go into ISIS, you can fix them, and then they will be reflected in the next weekly refresh in the dashboard. Another thing that I should point out is there's no way to know if the data was submitted electronically or on paper. So if it's in ISIS, it looks the same in the dashboard. It doesn't matter how it got there. So those are issues that, through the dashboard, we can't address. And then there's also no definitive way to determine if a permit requires a DMR or not. So this is from our previous demos, we've heard some feedback about this that we should make explicitly clear that permit limits and not in ISIS category actually contains two types of permits. And those two are where permit limits are required but have not been included, and that's a problem. And there are those where permit limits are not required. And that's not so much an issue, but we have no way of differentiating those two groups, so they're lumped together in permit limits not in ISIS currently. And we have a plan, which I'll get to in the enhancements here, to hopefully work around that. So moving to the other side for enhancements, our plan to work around that is we will be including new data elements, and they're listed here on the second bullet. A NIFTY's data group number, electronic reporting waiver type, and several others related to that. And with those new data elements, we're hoping that early next year we will be able to differentiate which permits should actually have limits in ISIS and which permits do not require limits in ISIS. And at that point, we will actually be able to include general permit covered facilities in the dashboard as well. They're currently restricted because too many of them fell into this second category where the permit limits were not required. So once we sort that out, we'll be able to add all of those permits in and have a more complete dashboard.
Devin?
Great. So, as I said, the dashboard will be available in EchoGov in the near future. Sorry, bear with me momentarily. So for now, we'll just look at it in the program itself, and we can give a demo this way. So here's the dashboard. As you can see, there are multiple components. The centerpiece here is this graph, which shows the 4 categories and what percentage each category uses for each state. So for example, in Florida, we can see that 83% are DMR ready, 16.7% are unresolved DMRs. We also have this table here, which shows the same data, but as raw numbers. So in this case, you can see which states have more permits, or less, Pennsylvania having many, some smaller states having many fewer permits. This table here shows the raw numbers, which are associated with this graph, and this pie chart shows the percentages, which are associated with this top graph. And we also have these filters on the side. So what's nice about Click is you can click on a state. We'll go with Washington, D.C., where we are currently. And you see that all of the graphs update, and we can see the 10 permits that are here. We can see that 7 are DMR ready, 3 have unresolved DMRs, there's none with tracking off, and no permit limits tonight. None with permit limits not in ISIS. But that's maybe too small to be a good example. So we can look at another state, Florida. Okay, we have a request for Florida. So we can see 472 permits here. But if we want to delve more into those, we can click on these filters and see that there are 201 major permits, 175 of which are DMR ready, and 271 minor permits, 217 of which are DMR ready, and we only have 1 with permit limits not in ISIS. We can also sort by different categories. If we want to look just by the categories that are present in the state, we can search there. We can search by components. So if we're curious about just POTWs in Florida, we can see those 142 permits. And finally, we can see the issuing agency. So who issued the permit. We can sort by state, or if it's from the EPA. Great. And the last thing that I would like to show from this dashboard is, so we can imagine that we are looking at the Florida data and we want to see just the status of minors in Florida. So we've made these selections. We're looking at just Florida and minors. But we want to see the facility specifically. So then we can move on to this next sheet, which has all of the facilities broken down. We have various columns here. There are too many to fit on this page, but all you have to do is right-click, export data, download your data file, and that will pump out an Excel spreadsheet with all of the data that we have included in the dashboard. So we're hopeful that once it's made available. You guys will look into that and download your data. And if there are any other columns you would like to see, you can certainly get into contact with us and we can add those very easily. So, and I guess I should add that any selection you make here in this first page, Florida and minor, for instance, are carried over into the second page. So this sheet is only showing minor permits within Florida. Great. So that's all.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. It's important, as I noted earlier, it's important to note that this is our best tool. This is our tool to ensure good coordination with states to make sure that we are clear on what we think is an ISIS, and then states can use this to assess how well they're doing. And if there's problems or bugs or if something doesn't look right, it may be a data error. It may be something on our end. So we're definitely looking for comments. But we do intend to use this in our coordination with states. And what you're seeing here is just the data. This will be embedded into a web page. Well, there'll be some instructions and overview and context, so people will know what it is they're looking for, as well as help files. And so what we're showing you now is literally what's on our development site, and when it's shared with you via EchoGov, it'll have more context and more information. So as I noted, we'll be using this in our outreach with states. And to talk about some of the outreach we've done with our states, I'm going to invite up Eric French. And he's going to talk about, thank you, Jesse. He's going to talk about some of the calls that we've done with states and to give you a kind of a summary of what we've learned so far.
Hi, everyone. So in March of last year, we began reaching out to our state partners to assess e-rule readiness, but more importantly, determine what we could do to assist in that endeavor. One important topic on those calls have been CROMAIR. Many years ago, the CROMAIR process was pretty long and pretty tedious. Our goal was to open up a dialogue with the states to determine what we could do to make that process go a lot smoother. So we developed a technical review committee to review each application. And I've personally been walking these applications through our Office of Environmental Information. And you've heard talk about two EPA tools earlier, NET and NetDMR. The CROMAIR application for those tools have been extremely reduced. The time on those has been extremely reduced. I've seen it take as little as 3 months, provided there's an Attorney General statement on file. If not, that could probably be pushed to maybe 4 or 5 months. But it's been streamlined, and we're very proud of that. So to date, we've reached out to 45 different state partners.
Next button.
We've had 45 different dialogues with our state partners, and that's about, I would say we've had maybe 72, 74 different calls. The first round of calls, we pretty much focused on e-rule readiness and CROMAIR, and since then we've talked to our states on a as-needed basis. So all in all, we've had about 72 or 74 calls. And out of it, we've determined that 36 states are in good shape for Phase 1 electronic reporting. About 9 states will require additional assistance, and we talk to them on a regular basis. I have a call next week with 2 of them. And 4 states will probably not meet the Phase 1 deadline requirements. And I mentioned the CROMAIR applications. Since we began our outreach initiative, we've facilitated the submission and approval of 18 applications, and right now we currently have 4 pending.
Great. So I think Eric's work is a good complement to the work that you saw from Jesse. So Jesse's dashboard is basically a view of electronic reporting readiness by the states from just a pure data perspective. And then the work that Eric is doing is to reach out and talk to people, to bring in some of the context or issues that people are struggling with. So from both sides, we're trying to get a sense of where we need to prioritize our resources to help states make the deadlines for electronic reporting. What I'm going to do now is switch in the last half hour that we have. We may finish early. We're going to talk about the built-in assessment mechanism. This is built into the electronic reporting rule itself, and it requires EPA to do a look back 6 months after each deadline. So the rule has deadlines when submissions need to transition from paper to electronic reporting, and 6 months after each deadline, EPA is to assess how well states are doing. And so for DMRs, for example, EPA will calculate the electronic reporting participation rate on June 21st, 2017. As the rule discusses, we will also separately evaluate the electronic participation rate for individual permitted facilities, and then we'll look separately at general permit covered facilities. There was a discussion of that in the preamble to the final rule. Good reasons for that, but we'll definitely be looking at DMR electronic reporting separately for individually permitted facilities and then for general permit covered facilities. And then also, as the rule describes, it's important to remember that facilities with a waiver from electronic reporting are excluded from these participation rate assessments. So in order to help us accurately identify DMR filers, to accurately identify facilities with waivers, and to accurately identify the DMRs that are filed electronically, it is our plan to roll out new data elements into ICES, and that will help us make these determinations. As Jesse noted, we will update the eRule dashboard with these new data elements, and this will help make our assessments more accurate. It's also important to note that as a means to fill in the gaps where NPDES regulated entities are not yet reporting electronically, EPA will use its authority as appropriate to issue individual notices that will require NPDES permittees to start electronically report their DMRs. And what we did with the final rule is we also issued at the same time an information collection request, also known as an ICR. This ICR includes the increase in burden associated with these individual notices that will require NPDES regulated entities to electronically report their program data. The way we've developed this in the rule is if there's a state with its own electronic reporting tool, and for whatever reason a facility in that state is not filing electronically, the plan is after a coordination with the state that EPA would issue a notice to the facility to start using the state's tool. So it is definitely not something that we want to do, but it's a means to help ensure that we make a gradual but steady transition towards full electronic reporting. And as the last bullet notices, states, we will absolutely work with authorized programs before we send out these notices, and we're planning on a 3-month review period before we send out any notices. So again, whether it's the work that Eric has been working on with individual personal outreach with states, or whether it's the dashboard that we demonstrated, we're going to have a sense of where electronic reporting is not working or where facilities are just not availing themselves of tools. And we have a mechanism to help ensure that if there's a nudge needed, we can nudge people to do electronic reporting. As John noted earlier at the very beginning of the webinar, we do have a goal. It's a 90% participation rate. It's a simple measure, and it's intended to help prompt DMR filers and states to switch from paper to electronic reporting. And this should be underlined in red. It already is underlined and in red, and it's to make sure that people understand that this is a goal. And it was included in the preamble to the final rule, so it's guidance, but it's not in the regulation itself. And we wanted it that way because we want to give ourselves some flexibility. So if a state is trying to figure out whether or not they're doing well in terms of electronic reporting, they can think of 90%, but as always, we will be working with states before we take any action, such as sending out those individual notices. Our goal is to work with states in a collaborative June of 2017 is an appropriate measure.